for June this year. Now, the festival serves a platform to amplify the voices of innovation, foster collaboration, and catalyze meaningful change within the financial technology space. Now, in the launch, it was noted that Africa is a continent to immense diversity and untapped opportunities. It is also a region that faces its fair share of challenges in the realm of financial inclusion.
Only about 10% of payments across Africa are digital payments. So they are obviously big players, but when we are talking about how the growth is happening, we must take that into consideration. We must take into consideration that we're just starting the journey. The continuous engagement between policymakers, regulators, and the fintech ecosystem needs to be something that is taken to the next notch. That's not to say that there isn't any engagement. I think we've seen tremendous improvement in that engagement between policymakers, regulators, and the fintech ecosystem. What is important is to ensure that there's a lot more seamless engagement between these two key players in the financial technology ecosystem, not just in Kenya, but across Africa. There has to be some policy intervention to ensure that more people get into the digital ecosystem this is a delicate balance, without hurting the players who've rightly earned their market share in the ecosystem.
All right, Gishinga, now when we look at Africa Fintech Festival, first of all, your reaction to this, is it something that is going to grow this particular sector?
Absolutely. Fintech has the possibility to transform the African continent. You'll find in many African countries, often there is a lack of inclusion, there's sometimes shortage of currency, people are not able to transact meaningfully. So fintech can play a very big role. And I think we should expect to see a variety. I'm always quite surprised to see when fintech is almost always being linked to mobile lending apps, which are the vast majority. One would think that there is no other opportunity, but there's quite a bit of opportunities. I think we need to see a bit more mobile wallets coming in, savings tools coming in. I think there is an overplay on the lending side, but very, very little being done in terms of helping people save, having mobile wallets where people can keep their money. And I think that's where the real opportunity is.
Mm-hmm. And now, even as we look at fintech in Africa, let us look at fintech in Kenya. What is the penetration like? And are we seeing various sectors also coming up? The way you've mentioned, we don't just restrict it to lending apps. Do we have other different industries that have really gotten into the fintech space?
Well, obviously, M-Pesa really has been the king since 2007, really the most iconic, not just in Kenya, but around the world. And I think that has almost been the foundation of the society. But beyond that, almost every other innovation has been on the lending side. And sometimes this lending occurs at very usurious rates and per se. So I think if these festivals can sort of help people think through other ways that fintech can touch their lives. And I think our savings rate in this country is very low. Mm-hmm. If we can have apps that can help people have wallets that can be used for particular segments, such as maybe the food segment or the real estate segment, I think that could be some really interesting work. But you don't see enough of that. I think there's this almost huge obsession with lending apps. And I think that needs to really be controlled because it really is getting out of hand.
Mm-hmm. And speaking about lending apps, I've remembered when we were speaking, sometimes the lending apps can really have very rogue ways of dealing with defaulters. All right, now, when we look at an African fintech festival, are we looking at us sharing some of the innovations that we have within the country? We get people from South Africa, we get people from Ethiopia, we get people from western side of Africa, and also within Kenya, now that Kenya is the hub of technology, especially within East Africa. What do you think this is all about?
Well, the way fintech plays in many countries is very different because a big part of fintech success lies with the central banks of those countries. One of the reasons M-Pesa was able to survive in Kenya and thrive was because the central bank at that time was fairly open to innovation, fairly lenient, which is not the case in other countries. Part of the reason M-Pesa failed in South Africa was the environment there was not friendly to it. So ability by the central banks to be open to ideas is almost always the biggest determinant on whether our country can thrive. And that's why the experiences of 54 countries, when they sit on the table, will be extremely different. One, Kenya is highly exposed to mobile money, but there are countries even till today, there is really no mobile money. So the diversity is actually quite breathtaking.
And when we look at the Finance Act, 2023 Finance Act, and the new taxations that were put in place, fintech also got some bit of very hard taxation when it comes to the fintech space. What do you think about this, and how will it affect this particular industry going forward?
Well, obviously it increases the cost of transactions, and cost is what makes fintech, particularly mobile money movement, possible. You know, during the COVID period, one of the policies the government adopted at that time was to waive transaction fees on mobile money, and we saw the usage of mobile money went exponentially up. So it tells you it's an area that is very price sensitive, and when you start increasing the VATs, the taxes on that, and making it more expensive, the reverse effect becomes true. More and more people actually start avoiding using it. In fact, last week central bank's numbers showed that the money operating in cash outside the economy is actually at its highest period. So it tells you people sometimes are worried about the taxation and are starting to go back to the physical cash that they had prior on.
All right. And now, speaking of taxation, now the Kenya Revenue Authority has announced a substantial response from taxpayers towards the ongoing tax amnesty program introduced by the Finance Act 2023. Now, as of February 20th, 2024, KRA revealed that a total of 227,071 taxpayers have benefited from the initiative, resulting in a waiver totaling to 209 billion shillings in penalties and interest. Now, the tax amnesty program, which commenced on September 1st, 2023, is set to conclude on June 30th, 2024. Now, it offers taxpayers the opportunity to apply for the waiver of penalties and interest accrued on outstanding taxes up to 31st of December 2022. Now, to qualify for the amnesty, taxpayers are required to fully settle their principal taxes by the stipulated deadline of June 30th, 2024. Now, Gishinga, when we look at a matter such as this one, the tax amnesty issue, now that almost over 220,000 Kenyans have benefited from this, do you think this is something that Kenyans would want to get into?
It will have mixed results, I think, and it will depend on how big those principal amounts are. I think for the people where the principal amount is fairly reasonable and they are able to negotiate, they will. But definitely there are some elements that might just continue as it is. So I think it's another, again, it speaks to the national tax policy. You know, is our taxation convenient for people? Is it in a way that people can easily and affordably pay? Because these tax waivers assume that compliance was difficult in the past, and that's why you have penalties and this sort of like effects. So one has to ask, are we making, yes, beyond the amnesties, are we making a national tax policy that is actually convenient and easy so that there is no future defaulting, there is no future arrears coming in? That's really the fundamental question. If we don't answer that, it will mean almost every 3 years we'll have to be giving amnesties because people really possibly are caught up and unable to pay those rates.
And even as we see the tax amnesty continuing, and now they're saying for someone to apply, it should be by June of this year. What will this require, especially when it comes to someone who would want to apply for this, and maybe they have a problem with paying tax because they've said, okay, now you need to clear the other taxes that you have in order for you to qualify for this?
I think the way the government will approach this is to try and use it as an incentive to access other government services. For example, one of the things that came out yesterday was the issue of if you wanted to purchase those affordable housing units, one has to be cleared by KRA. So those are sort of like the levers that will be used to help people do that. Obviously, the KRA has many times said that if you can come up with a payment plan, maybe you can't pay all of it at once, but if you can come up with a payment plan, then that is a way to a solution. But then again, we have to go back to the question, the initial question, and asking, are these taxation rates a bit too high? Mm-hmm. Are they beyond really the privy of a number of people doing business? I think that's a fundamental question, because if we don't resolve that, then almost every 3-5 years, we'll really be getting back to that same place. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right, Gishinga, we've come to the end of this particular conversation. It was really nice having you on the show today. All right, we've come to the end of this edition of Business Today. We were discussing about some of the highlights when it comes to stories that have been making headlines this week in the world of business. My name is Calvin Nyakundi. Have yourselves a lovely, lovely evening. And remember, Be Your KTN is coming up next.